The rising sun over the river Indus seems to defy the soft mist spread as a blanket, not to disturb the sleeping splendor of the past. Tread softly over the terrain so that a civilization that thrived here for about 3 millennia may not be disturbed in their slumber. This is the origin. This is the root from which 1 billion souls have sprung up and spread all over the earth. This is the Indus Civilization. It all began with the discovery of 2 cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. It had a deep impact not only on history, but the entire Indian civilization. In this program, we shall deal with the extent, the nomenclature, and the origin of the Indus civilization.
The discovery of these 2 cities, namely Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, linked by the river Indus, actually pushed back the origins of Indian civilization to the 4th millennium BC. And commenting on this, historian Irfan Habib, he said that after the civilization of Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus civilization emerged as the 3rd great civilization in the whole world. Now, this civilization, that is the Indus civilization, also marks the first phase of urbanization in India. You see, the civilization was essentially confined to the cities. It was a city-based culture. So urbanization was very important. So the first civilization that the Indian subcontinent witnessed was also urban in nature. Right? Am I clear? Yes. Now, the earliest evidence of this civilization, however, was accidentally discovered by Alexander Cunningham, who was not an archaeologist, who was not a historian, but he was an engineer. He was a British engineer. And if you just recall, 1853 was a very momentous year in the history of our country, because railway lines were established for the first time, right? And the laying down of tracks, the laying down of railway lines involved a lot of digging, literally digging up the earth, right? And Cunningham, being an engineer, was probably present in the site. And he accidentally came across the first Harappan seal, which he did not know was a Harappan seal, obviously. It was a Harappan seal, later on identified as one. It showed a bull and 6 letters from the Indus script, which has not been deciphered, as you know, even today. Right, it is still not deciphered. But Cunningham, however, should take the credit for discovering the earliest specimen of the Indus civilization. Now, after that, we hear of 1921 and 22, that time period, in between from 1853 to 1921-22, nothing constructive probably had happened, even though the Archaeological Survey of India had already been established in 1896, right? But it was not before 1921 that the excavation work of Harappa started, and the work was carried out by Dayaram Sani, right, Dayaram Sani, and this was also about the same time, 1921 to 22, when Mohenjo-daro would be discovered by Rakhaldas Banerjee. So you see, the discoveries took place more or less at the same time. And ever since then, that is from 1921 to 22 onwards, for the next 25 years, That would bring it to how many years? What would that be? 25 plus 22 would make it 47, exactly, till independence, right? So for the rest of the colonial period, for the rest of the British period, many archaeologists would now be engaged in excavation work.
So, though the Archaeological Survey of India was established in 1896, the discovery of the Indus civilization was a chance occurrence. The earliest historians or archaeologists connected with the study of Indus civilization are Dayaram Sahni, Rakhaldas Banerjee, John Marshall, E. Mackay, and Mortimer Wheeler.
Now, what happened in the post-colonial period, in the post-partition, in the post-independence period? Now, we know that the excavation work was carried out very methodically and very meticulously, both by the archaeologists of the newly founded state Pakistan and India. So, you know, there were attempts made by Pakistani archaeologists as well as Indian archaeologists, and it continued soon after 1947. Now, if you see the map, the excavation work carried out, and you just see the map and you will find that Kot DG to east of Mohenjo-daro and Amri in the Dadu district on the lower Indus were discovered in the year 1958.
In India, excavations were carried out in the regions of Haryana, Rajasthan and Gujarat. Lothal, believed to be a major seaport in Gujarat, was discovered in 1954. Another 160 kilometers to the south, Malavan, located close to Surat, was also identified as an Indus site. These were indeed significant findings.
Next, we come to a very important region, Dholavira, which is the latest discovery. Dholavira, located on Khadira Bait, an island in the great Rann of Kutch in Gujarat. It was discovered between 1989 to 1990. So it is the most recent excavation work that started in 1989 to 1990. Excavations made in Kalibangan in North Rajasthan, 200 miles west of Delhi, testified to the spread of civilization in the east. Close to Kalibangan again you will see two important places. One is Banawali and Rakhi Garhi. And these are two important sites on the river Indus. However, Alamgirpur in the Meerut district, in the center of Ganges Yamuna Doab, is considered to mark the farthest extension of the Indus culture to the east.
Ma'am, will you kindly repeat that?
I will repeat, yes. I said that Alamgirpur in the Meerut district, in the center of Ganga Yamuna Doab, is considered to mark the farthest extension of the Indus culture to the east. In the north, in the region of Punjab, there is Rupar in the foothills of the Himalayas, and this is the farthest outpost in India in the north. Similarly, there is another important site called Manda in Jammu and Kashmir. You see, the Indus civilization was essentially a culture of the plains, reaching but never really crossing the sub-Himalayan foothills. In the west, the civilization penetrated to Baluchistan up to Sukta-Gendor, close to Pakistan's border with Iran. So this is the extent, the entire extent of the Indus civilization, and on the whole it can be said that in terms of modern territorial boundaries, the civilization covered almost the whole of Punjab. Almost the whole of Punjab, Punjab falling in both Indian Union as well as in Pakistan. Apart from this, it included Haryana, parts of western UP, northern Rajasthan, Sindh, most of Gujarat, and parts of northeast and southern Baluchistan. So you get some idea about the spatial spread of the Indus civilization. All these states that we know today fall within India and Pakistan were under the Indus culture.
Names do have some significance, but often the first names may not be suitable, which have to be modified with later findings. Some call it Harappan civilization, some call it Indus civilization, and yet others call it Indus Valley civilization. What is it finally?
It was called the Harappan civilization simply because Harappa was the first site to be excavated by Dairam Sani, right? Harappa was the first site in the Indus civilization to be excavated by Dairam Sani, and hence by that what shall I say, by that logic, the entire culture came to be called the Harappan culture. Because there is an unwritten understanding among the scholars and historians, there is a tradition that usually civilization is designated by the earliest site, by the first site that has been discovered. So it is simply that. Just because Harappa was the first site to be excavated by the archaeologists, that name stuck. It continued to be called the Harappan civilization. And who was the person who first used the term Harappan civilization? It was Mortimer Wheeler, right? It was Mortimer Wheeler who first used the term Harappan culture in his report on the excavations of Harappa way back in 1946, just 1 year before independence, in 1946. But listen to this, even then, just 7 years later, that is in 1953, Mortimer Wheeler also used the term Indus civilization, right? So he began by calling it the Harappan civilization, then he himself called it the Indus civilization in 1953 when he published a book on the subject, and the title of the book was Indus Civilization. So you see, nothing was yet fixed then, right, as it is now also. And you also know that for a long time the civilization was referred to as the Indus Valley civilization, isn't it? This is how we learnt in our childhood, and for generations we have referred to this civilization as Indus Valley civilization. Suddenly we find a change in the nomenclature, and it is no longer, it seems, apt to call it the Indus Valley civilization, but we just refer to it as the Indus civilization. Why?
It is because the term Indus Valley civilization was used in the early stages of excavations in the Indus Valley. But over a period of time, more excavations were made, and they showed that this civilization had spread beyond the valley. Therefore, it was not appropriate to use the term Indus Valley Civilization.
And in this context, I must refer to one great historian, Professor D.K. Chakraborty, who pointedly remind us, who constantly remind us that how wrong it is to use the term Indus Valley Civilization and how right it is to call it the Indus Civilization or maybe Harappan Civilization also. Harappan Civilization is favored by D.K. Chakraborty. He feels that it is geographically a non-committal term and probably the most correct term to use. He also says that. But only out of, what shall I say, a deference to its long usage, the term Indus Civilization can also be used, right? If you have any question, then...
Ma'am, you just mentioned D.K. Chakraborty favored Harappan civilization or Indus civilization and not Indus Valley civilization. So why specifically Harappan? Why not Mohenjo-daro then?
Yes, that's a very valid point you have raised, Navonita. The thing is, you see, I said that Harappa was the first site to be discovered, right? It was the first site to be discovered, and because of that, the civilization came to be known after its name, the Harappan civilization. That was a tradition to call a civilization by the first site that is discovered. And Mohenjo-daro was discovered soon afterwards, but chronologically it came a little later. So that is why probably it was not called Mohenjo-daro civilization, but Harappa civilization.
Historians are divided regarding the genesis of this Indus civilization. Some claim that it is indigenously originated. Others say it is a colony of some other civilizations. Can we come to any definite conclusions?
Now, historians who, like John Marshall or V. Gordon Childe, Stuart Pigott, you know his very famous book, Prehistoric Civilization, Noni Gopal Mojumdar, they belong to a school who theorize about the indigenous origin of the civilization. They are very categorical in their view, and they state that the civilization originated here in this country, in this soil, right? And in fact, V.D. Gordon Childe wrote that it was specifically Indian, forming the very basis of modern Indian culture. Now, that also opens out another discussion. You can bring in the question of change and continuity, how the Indus civilization is still continuing even in the present times, right? So, that is very important, I think, here. And Noni Gopal Mojumdar also made extensive work in the region of Amri. He made extensive work in the region of Amri in Sindh between 1929 to 1931, in the colonial period, 1929 to 1931. And he came to the conclusion that the pottery that he discovered in Amri had a very distinct style of its own. It had a distinct style of its own, and it should be looked upon as an earlier phase of the Chalcolithic civilization that is represented by Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Now, on the other hand, we have Mortimer Wheeler, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, who in 1947 thought and wrote that the idea of the civilization of the Indus plain actually came from Mesopotamia. In other words, he thought that the Indus civilization was really an extension of the Mesopotamian civilization, right? It was an extension of the Mesopotamian civilization, and so he was really directly in contradiction to the other historians like Stuart Pigott, Gordon Childe, John Marshall and Noni Gopal Mojumdar. But Mortimer Wheeler also found certain followers. There were other historians who agreed with him, and they were Heine Geldern, who wrote in 1956. Then there was Gordon, 1958, these two historians also became very great supporters of this idea. They began to look upon the cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa as colonial cities, right? As colonial towns, as colonial cities.
Ma'am, why have the second school of historians referred to the Indus cities as colonial cities?
They felt that the architectural designs found in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa showed signs of alien domination. So they detected some, in their own way, detected some foreign influence over the architectural patterns of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, and they said that there were signs of alien domination, and these two citadels were really colonial towns, right? Colonial towns, and the Indus civilization was really an extension of the Mesopotamian civilization.
That was one view. However, in the 1950s and 60s, more excavations were carried out. More data poured in. The entire perspective of Indus civilization changed. These excavations pushed the period of the civilization far back into history.
Between 1955 and 1957, a very intensive excavation work was carried out at Kot Diji. You can see it from the map, Kot Diji. And you see a fortified citadel castle was discovered, right? A fortified citadel castle was discovered below the Harappan level of the site. And this work gained further support from another historian whose name is J. M. Casal, C-A-S-A-L, who also wrote between 1959 to 1962, and he lent support to the fact, in fact, Noni Gopal Mojumdar's find of a pre-Indus level, and he identified a transitional period between the early Amri culture and later Indus civilization. Now, Noni Gopal Mojumdar also showed that there was a pre-Indus level in Amri, and in fact, Amri had a very distinct culture of its own, right? Amri pottery had a very distinct culture of its own. And the third excavation, the third major excavation was carried out in Kalibangan. Kalibangan, this work was done by B.B. Lal and B.K. Thapar. B.B. Lal and B.K. Thapar. And the excavations at Kalibangan also showed similar results. A fortified and pre-Indus settlement was found in the western sector of the site. A fortified and pre-Indus settlement was found in the western sector of the site. So you see, basically the three major excavations that was carried out in the 50s and the 60s at Kot Diji, at Amri, and at Kalibangan pointed to the fact that the Indus culture was of indigenous origin, right? It was of indigenous origin, and the debate was therefore finally resolved in the 1960s in favor of the indigenous theorizers.
Due to these findings, it was not only confirmed that the Indus civilization had an indigenous origin, but a new terminology was added. Earlier historians would speak of just three periods: the early, the mature, and late Harappan period. Now they began speaking about a pre-Harappan period. This was essential to describe the findings at Kot Diji, Kalibangan, and other sites. Scholars were becoming aware of an important fact.
The Harappan civilization definitely did not have a short duration. It did not have a short duration, right? And the whole process of its germination, maturity, and end. Germination, maturity, and end covered a period of 2,200 years. 2,200 years between 3,500 BC to 1,300 BC. There were three stages of evolution really: the pre-Harappan or the early Harappan. You know, scholars have sometimes used the term early Harappan in place of pre-Harappan also. So pre-Harappan or early Harappan, followed by the mature Harappan stage, and finally the late Harappan stage. So in this way we can come to such a conclusion. And archaeologists also discovered another important thing, that the ground for Indus civilization, as you were pointing out now, Bonita, that the ground for Indus civilization was prepared by the early Neolithic and Chalcolithic culture of the 8th and 7th millennium BC. So the ground was being prepared for a very long time, and it suddenly did not just crop up. I mean, like Rome was not built in a day, we say. So Indus civilization was also not built in a day. And so the earlier preceding Chalcolithic culture was regarded by some scholars as the pre-Harappan stage. But at present, this stage is called the early Harappan culture by a number of historians. And this is followed by the mature Harappan stage, when urbanization had reached a fully developed form. That was a mature Harappan stage. And the late Harappan stage would denote the stage of decline. After you reach the peak, then the decline started. So the late Harappan stage would include the stage of decline. So in this way one can study the gradual evolution of the Harappan culture.
In this program, we dealt with the most ancient civilization of Southeast Asia, the Indus Civilization. This extinct civilization, according to some historians, is perhaps the third major civilization after Egypt and Mesopotamia. In the beginning, it was thought that this civilization existed in the Indus River Valley, but over a period of time, archaeological discoveries pushed its boundaries to Surat in the south, Meerut in the east, Kashmir in the north, and the border of Pakistan and Iran in the west. Therefore, it is now called Indus Civilization rather than Indus Valley Civilization. There were also controversies about its origin in the beginning, but later, due to extensive archaeological excavations, it is proved beyond doubt that these civilizations were indigenous in nature and not colonies of some other civilizations.
But it was not before 1921 that the excavation work of Harappa started, and the work was carried out by Dayaram Sani, right, Dayaram Sani, and this was also about the same time, 1921 to 22, when Mohenjo-daro would be discovered by Rakhaldas Banerjee. So you see, the discoveries took place more or less at the same time, and ever since then, that is from 1921 to 22 onwards, for the next 25 years, that would bring it to how many years? What would that be? 25 plus 22 would make it 47, exactly, till independence, right? So for the rest of the colonial period, for the rest of the British period, many archaeologists would now be engaged in excavation work.
So, though the Archaeological Survey of India was established in 1880 by the entire Indian civilization, In this program, we shall deal with the extent, the nomenclature, and the origin of the Indus civilization.
The discovery of these two cities, namely Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, linked by the river Indus, actually pushed back the origins of Indian civilization to the 4th millennium BC. And commenting on this, historian Irfan Habib, he said that after the civilization of Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus civilization emerged as the 3rd great civilization in the whole world. Now, this civilization, that is the Indus civilization, also marks the first phase of urbanization, literally digging up the earth, right? And Cunningham, being an engineer, was probably present in the site, and he accidentally came across the first Harappan seal, which he did not know was a Harappan seal. Obviously, it was a Harappan seal, later on identified as one. It showed a bull and 6 letters from the Indus script, which has not been deciphered, as you know, even today. Right, it is still not deciphered. But Cunningham, however, should take the credit for discovering the earliest specimen of the Indus civilization. Now, after that, we hear of 1921 and 22, that time period, in between from 1853 to 1921-22, nothing constructive probably had happened, even though the Archaeological Survey of India had already been established in 1896, right?
The rising sun over the river Indus seems to defy the soft mist spread as a blanket, not to disturb the sleeping splendor of the past. Tread softly over the terrain so that a civilization that thrived here for about 3 millennia may not be disturbed in their slumber. This is the origin. This is the root from which 1 billion souls have sprung up and spread all over the earth. This is the Indus civilization. It all began with the discovery of 2 cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. It had a deep impact not only on history.
India. You see, the civilization was essentially confined to the cities. It was a city-based culture. So urbanization was very important. So the first civilization that the Indian subcontinent witnessed was also urban in nature. Right? Am I clear? Yes. Now, the earliest evidence of this civilization, however, was accidentally discovered by Alexander Cunningham, who was not an archaeologist, who was not a historian, but he was an engineer. He was a British engineer. And if you just recall, 1853 was a very momentous year in the history of our country, because railway lines were established for the first time, right? And the laying down of tracks, the laying down of railway lines involved a lot of digging.